Good afternoon, everyone. And as I've been told, as the day has worn on, the attendance has understandably dwindled a bit. But then we'll be coming to a conclusion and focus on those of you who are. Oh, I'm sorry. Those of you who are here who have been listening to the discussion so far, so that we can decide how best to take it forward. I must say that the notes I got, I was in Parliament where I had to participate in a debate, so I didn't have a chance to be here, suggest a very rich and detailed discussion. But Mr. Mauskar was here, and so I'm going to ask him to give us what he sees as the big takeaways from the discussion, and he's very keen on inviting you all to chip in as well and join us in analyzing what we should retain from the three sessions that have already happened today. So we'll start by asking Mr. Mauskar to give us his read on the big themes that have emerged from today's discussion and what we should be doing next. Sir.
Thank you, sir. It was an interesting, if I may say, with due regards to you, because I don't know whether that's the right word or not, an interesting conflation of air pollution, that is emission of substances which are toxic to human beings, which can cause death, and this climate change, which is due to greenhouse gases, and some of them like carbon dioxide and water vapor are basic to any living system. And the confluence to my mind was that the immediate actions which need to be taken, whether you call it action plan, whether you call it nationally determined contributions or whatever, there is a big overlap or commonality between them. Now, I don't really want to summarize what all the sessions did, because as I see the faces, almost all of you were there. Sir, if I may suggest, let's get, because I have, as befits an ex-civil servant, I have made my own notes.
Please, let's hear yours.
I remembered my days when I was acting as the Central Pollution Control Board chairman, which addressed the air pollution part of the problems which we were discussing. And I also remembered when I was lead negotiator for India for climate change. But those reminiscences and my conclusions, I think I should like to visit later. But maybe, sir, we can ask, I'll not say volunteers, but we'll ask for people to give not their questions, which they were asking earlier, but rather their conclusions or their observations, maybe shortly 2 to 3 minutes each. And after hearing, let's say, sir, about half a dozen such contributions, then I would like to say something for 10 minutes, and sir, you can have the last
Certainly.
word.
So why don't we open it up to all of you at this stage, particularly those who have been listening to the discussions. You must have formed your own reactions, your own thoughts, your own observations. Who's going to volunteer to break the ice and be the first? Come on, you can't all be such silent spectators. The concept of a round table is that everybody around the table can chip in. So,
Ritik.
Yes. Do I have a hand? Yes, right, the gentleman in the front. Is there a handheld mic, folks? Yes. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. So my name is Ritwik Sharma, and I'm working with Observer Research Foundation. So the basic level statement I would like to give on this point would be that on a policy level, there seems to be some movement, but on the very, very ground level, there is a basic lack of awareness. There is a system of environmental injustice, which I believe is somewhere or the other, which we can understand after sitting through these three panels, that there are people suffering in this country, and most of them don't know why. They don't even know what is causing that. They do not understand the reasons. They do not understand the reasons why that pollution is being caused, and neither do they understand what implications they're going to have, it's going to have on their health. And it somewhere or the other comes down to people in this room and the policymakers who somewhere or the other hold their lives in their hands. And my takeaway from these three panels would be that there is a certain ambiguity that needs to be solved, and the people in this room are capable of solving that for the people by being the translators of policy for the people on the ground who may or may not understand what kind of health implications or what kind of problems they might face in the coming years? Thank you.
Another voice, environmental injustice and lack of awareness is absolutely basic. He's right. Others. I was struck by seeing in the notes that a lot of people today have focused on vehicular pollution. Is there a hand there? Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
So just my summary of the day today in terms of having attended all the sessions is that there's a large-scale need for solutions to address air pollution, and probably some of the solutions are going to come through just pure financial structures and financial mechanisms, whereas some of the solutions are going to be more through a public dialogue. So even when we're coming up with solutions, there's going to be analysis that needs to be done in terms of whether it's financially viable, and it's going to work for certain large-scale projects. And for more decentralized projects, potentially there's need for an analysis of the economic aspect of it and the financial aspect of it. And that's when the government comes in terms of not just facilitating those projects, but also financing those projects and ensuring that all the different stakeholders, whether it's large multilateral institutions, other investors, private capital within India and outside India, comes together to make this whole mission successful for the country.
Thank you. Actually, I'd like Mr. Mauskar, when he gets around to his remarks, to address that. He has been in government and seen from the inside how these decisions are made on what can be financed by the government and not. Others? Yep.
Someone else. So my name is Partho. I work for EDF. And my question is specifically to Mr. Mauskar. No, I am. But then there is one thing which came out very significantly out, and I wanted to understand, because this results a lot when it comes to the enforcement at the last mile level. And that is that the state governments and the state pollution control boards, who are your last connecting point in terms of culminating the policies and the various decisions taken by the Central Pollution Control Board and the government, and they enjoy a lot of autonomy. And I wanted to understand that how, I feel that that is a very big gap, which basically boils down to a point that where we have been able to not take very strong measures in terms of regulating the emissions or whatever with the industry is concerned. And yeah, I just wanted to place it in front of you, especially you being there in the CPCB.
And linked to that, Mauskar sir, one of the observations that also came through from the reports I got in the discussion was the concern that our problem is not so much laws, our problem is implementation. And if we are not able to implement even the insights that we have arrived at, how can we solve the problem? So again, as somebody who's worked in government, when you make your remarks, I hope you will look at the question of practical action and how to get things done. And not just at the theory of the diagnosis of the problem, because there we seem to already, all of us, be on the same page. Yes, mic there. Ma'am?
Hi, my name is Kalyani. I'm from All India Women's Conference. I was not here throughout the day, but I came in the morning and went back because I had some work. But I just wanted to point out one or two things that I, in fact, would like to take forward what the first gentleman, he spoke from the ORF, that there seems to be big difference between the policy and the reality at the grassroots level. Because I think after the first roundtable last year we had under your guidance, we did some survey in a resettlement colony in Buddha Vihar. And we found there is awareness to some extent about the climate change as per, but not many people knew about the climate change. But they were aware that, you know, suddenly the diseases like allergy has increased. And, you know, some other major health issues they were facing in recent years. So we tried to tell them it is all because of the climate change, and then there are certain things which you can do. So what I would feel is, I think we need to go back to the grassroots a lot more if we want to make the people aware of, and then we need to give them solutions. And for that, we need to be prepared. And I know the government is doing a lot of things about the air quality control and monitoring. But I think when we go down to the school level to children, they all tell us, yes, madam, हम लोगों ने जो है अब रिक्शा में आ रहे हैं, हम गाड़ी में नहीं आ रहे हैं. So they are doing it at their own level. But we need to really give them a lot of solutions related to health. And I think together we can be able to do with all the health authorities and more awareness. I think that would really help upon this.
So my name is Barun. One of the points brought up earlier was with regards to the implementation of Euro 6 fuel. I believe Delhi has already implemented that, and we have a plan of seeing that at some point in 2021, 2022 for the rest of the country. My question is, if we have the largest oil refinery in the world producing the best fuel of the world today and exporting it out of India, and when we have a national emergency with regards to our crops, we stop the import of critical crops. Why can't we stop the export? We stop the export of critical crops. Why can't we stop the export of the best fuel of the world and use it for saving our lungs for the people of our country?
Are you referring to the Jamnagar refinery?
Yes, sir.
Which, of course, is in the private sector. So it would essentially involve telling a capitalist he can't make profits.
Well, he's using our country's resources.
And it's an interesting idea. I'm not averse to it. I think we'll have to see how that can...
All farmers are capitalists also. They make money for themselves, but we do restrict the export of grains and crops in national emergencies.
You can make that comment. Go ahead.
I can do that immediately. See, your vehicles are the same old vehicles. It will not help. Using Euro 6 fuel in, let's say, Fiat car or Ambassador car won't take you far much.
But all vehicles that are today imported are actually downgraded from Euro 6 because a Mercedes or a BMW coming into India is downgraded to a Euro 4, Euro 3 vehicle by removing the diesel
Mr. Sanwal talked about upper middle class sitting
but
here.
Sir, even our own vehicles that are made in India are exported for other countries and they are capable of making Euro 6. Why can't our vehicles get to Euro 6 faster as well?
I think it's certainly worth pursuing. There was a hand on this side I saw. Yes, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Sunil Dhaya from Greenpeace. Going through these 3 sessions of discussion today, entire day, as well as whatever is happening in the larger air quality debate outside, we have seen lots of, I'll say, academic kind of approach even from various wings of the government, be it Niti Aayog, Pollution Control Board, or EPCA, that we come up with lots of plans, but actual implementation fail. So it's an academic exercise, which I'll say. The other issue with controlling air pollution, because being a concurrent subject, state pollution control, there was a discussion which said that state pollution control boards or the state governments have other majority of issues which they would like to tackle before tackling air pollution because they don't have capacity to do it, and hunger, water, and all those things are still priority issues for them. Even despite of knowing all those limitations, and with CPCB, with your experience, you would agree to it that state pollution control boards also doesn't have capacities to kind of work at that large scale and be that aggressive, even in controlling industrial pollution. So even after knowing all those limitations, why are we in the NCAP, which is the largest program we are right now speaking about, not putting this different provisions of financial assistance from the state, from the central government to the state pollution control boards and state governments? And right now we are saying that we are leaving the timeline target to be set by state governments, and we are leaving the financial assistance to be given by state governments to implement NCAP. So 2 biggest issues, the timeline and the financial assistance in the largest program, are still left to the bodies who doesn't have air quality on their priority agenda, who doesn't have resources for it, who doesn't have financial capacities to do it. So how do we tackle that? And I think it's the time, right time, we have to start answering those questions. And before MOF comes out with the final version of the NCAP, we should ensure that these issues are tackled in a more robust way.
I agree with that observation. It's a very, very right, cogent observation. One last comment, yes? at the back, and then we'll have a second round after you hear Mr. Mauskar. We've got one more comment, then I'll ask him to speak for about 10 minutes, and we'll have one more round before we come to a conclusion. Yes, go ahead, sir.
My name is Yogesh. I am from All India Professionals Congress. We'd also done a white paper on pollution way back.
I was going to mention that. Good. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, sir. One thing is, we've been talking of vehicular pollution, which I understand contributes to 15 to 20% of the overall air pollution. Why don't we talk of the other 80% in a manner and make people aware? Having said that, once we know that this contributes, especially in the cities, around 20% or maybe 24% as different studies done by different groups, which probably have some kind of an interest to shift the figures from here to there. In Delhi, we know, in our white paper, what we analyzed is, sir said that, Mr. Pawan was here earlier and he said that people are moving from two-wheelers to four-wheelers and they find it, very difficult to come back. Our observation has been public transport per se for an individual to move from point A to point B is more expensive than he would buy a two-wheeler. And if we can do this deduction, the government could also understand this very well. In metro, it's cheaper to travel by a two-wheeler up to 18 kilometers than you do on a metro. So having these figures over there, why does not the government take some active steps which are economically beneficial to the people in India? Today, in Delhi, we've had 3 deaths, unfortunately. 3 children have died out of starvation. So the priorities of the government to spend money, and we knew the economic impact of pollution today is so very high. A World Bank report said around 7% is the impact of pollution. So what steps is the government taking? We have poor road infrastructure. Something like a BRT has been scrapped in Delhi. Metro fares have gone up. Sir, I would like you to address these questions today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yogesh. And the report that Yogesh mentioned, which is a white paper by the All India Professionals Congress Delhi chapter, was released by us in December last year. And any of you who are curious about it, please go on www.profcongress.com and you can find it there. It's done some pretty intensive work and gone through some rounds of consultation before being released. So the diagnoses are there. We have to head towards prescription and then the consumption of the prescription. Okay, so I'm going to turn now to Dr. Mauskar to give us his thoughts, observations, including reactions to some of the observations you've all just made. And then we'll have one more round of discussion before we conclude. Mr. Mauskar.
Thank you. I thought I'll give you a mix of some of my thoughts that, like, if I was in the panel, what I would have said, and maybe something from my experience, because after having sort of worked in Delhi for about 10 years in 2 stints, I'm happily now not only retired, but I'm staying in Pune, which is far more healthier city than Delhi. But I do come, I'm summoned up and then I have a nice time here, having all the, milk sweets, which, south of Vindhyas don't taste that same. The question, I think there are 3 ways of looking at it. I thought I'll pose it to you. India, and somebody talked of $10 trillion economy. Nowadays, for last many years, it's not last 4 years, it's many years, sir, that we are talking of India as a future superpower. And believe me, I have been negotiating for India since 2006. And each year of negotiation when we went, I found that, again, I don't mind, despite the minister who was leading the team, India was listened to more and more carefully. So it was not that it is our self-perception in a nice mirror which we see. But then, what are the realities on the ground? The realities on ground is, and somebody had written a book, India a Soft State. That was in the 60s. And I think we still are a soft state. And unless, I don't say that we should become a hard state like a dictatorship or something, but unless that softness goes away, the gap between the wonderful vision, the elaborate laws, elaborate policies, the nice diagrams of the mechanisms to implement those policies, and the actual implementation on the ground, which as common citizen all of us see, that's not going to disappear. It's nothing to do with the problems which we are discussing, air pollution and all, but that's fundamental to whatever issue you think of. And in my retirement, I do think, I cogitate, as they say, on this. Then again, what does this superpower, a $10 trillion economy mean? It could mean that India would have the largest number of billionaires, or Indian billionaire will be richer than Bill Gates. It could also mean not only eradication of poverty, not alleviation, eradication. That's one phrase I heard during climate change negotiations, that we have to eradicate poverty. Poor are not always with us. So when we eradicate the poverty, do we want to become a middle class kind of a country, that full of middle class and maybe a couple of billionaires scattered here and there? Or we want to be a country with, as I said, record-breaking number of millionaires and billionaires and poor people? That's again this thing. And what it all boils down to is the question of privilege. If you know, privilege is the anglicized form of a Latin word, which means private law. Now, Delhi as a city exemplifies what is privilege. The gentleman from RWA who was sitting there, who was saying municipal corporation doesn't give me 10 square feet of land to compost. Now, each of the big societies, I'm staying in some friend's guest house in Hele Road, that society has got a huge, big, chunk of land which they have developed as a park, and there are ducks and some kind of animals there. Why can't they compost their produce or their waste in that plot of land? I can imagine if somebody from, cross Jamuna, in Delhi, Latins Delhi, people will look down upon trans Jamuna areas. There is some small society said, hum kidhar mein compost karenge. I understand. And in Pune, the societies are doing it. The society where I stay, they are composting. So this is a privilege. Or because government for some reason, and the reason was that they said the transportation is through trucks, so diesel should be subsidized. In India is the only country where diesel is substantially cheaper than petrol. Now, of course, margins are going down rather. People purchased cars, and most of the cars are running here. So I don't know. Sir, I am posing it. Part of my remarks are meant for you also. That this culture of privilege, how do we get rid of it? Maybe, since we quote framers of the Constitution, they thought they framed Constitution with those articles of fundamental rights and all, and we are going to get a privileged-less society. We are nowhere there. And unless that happens, I'll come to the nitty-gritty also. Unless that happens, most of the things will be up in the air. One of your colleagues, of course, in the other house, Mr. Jairam Ramesh, he was a minister. So we were talking same thing that, this environment is just this thing, these corporate guys are not interested. We said even PSUs are not interested. Even the other ministries and the other ministers are not interested. So we came up with a circular with minister's approval, and that was in his power to do. It was a circular as a subordinate kind of thing to the Environment Protection Act. We said that environmental concerns should be embedded in the working of a company, just like financial concerns are embedded in working of a company. There's a director of finance, and you've got audit mechanism, you've got financial targets, you've got financial manuals. Similarly, we said that all large corporations, more than 5 million tons of production of steel or so on and so forth, should have some environmental plan, get it approved by the board, because unless something gets approved by the board, it has no sanctity, have some mechanism of implementing it, and have some kind of a transparency. And we were sure that once the companies are going to tell the shareholders, naturally, the whole world will come to know, because what is being told to shareholders will be told to the stock exchanges. What is being told to stock exchanges will be told to all you people. That circular with, minister had to sign about 50 letters. He wrote to all his colleagues. At our level, we wrote to all the CMDs. And believe me, we didn't get a single reply. Then, as happens in government, I happily retired. I don't know what happened to that circular. I don't see it on the website of the ministry. The second story I wanted to tell you, you talk of air pollution. No, when you talk of pollution, when you talk scientifically of anything, you must have a standard of measurement. So there is a air quality standard which is notified by the government under the Environment Act, and the framing of it is suggested by the scientific body, which is the Central Pollution Control Board. So I headed a committee comprising of all the stakeholders, there were people from factories, people from labor, scientists and all. Now the critical part is, and you must understand, then you'll know many things which were slipping here. When you talk of suspended particulate matter is what is there in the air. Then there is RSPM, that is respirable suspended particulate matter, that is what is called PM 2.5, because if some big chunk of dust or something wants to go in your nostril, you sneeze it out. So these are small things, less than 2.5 micron in diameter, which goes in your body and create all kind of problems. But then, as somebody did mention during the debate, that Thar Desert is sort of approaching Delhi because of all this deforestation, 1 kilometer per year. So part of it is what they call a silicaceous or sandy dust, and rest of it is organic dust, which is due to insufficient combustion and all those kind of things. So it is simple thing we found internationally, that you take all the dust which is gathered over 24 hours and you dissolve it in benzene. You shake it in benzene. What settles below is what is called silicaceous dust. You can say Thar Desert or Rajasthan origin. Rest of it has to be human origin, because unless there are forest fires or something there, it is due to human origin. So in the standards, we said RSPM level so much, SPM level so much, within bracket, benzene soluble fraction so much, and benzene insoluble fraction so much. Moment you know, and when you see in Times of India, they say SPM is this, PM 2.5 is so much, it doesn't tell you anything. In summer also it is high, in winter also it is high. The composition is not known. So the file came to the ministry. Ultimately, because then I was not concerned with the processing, ultimately the standards came out and I saw on the website. And lo and behold, the benzene soluble and benzene insoluble fractions had disappeared. So then we were traveling somewhere, so I asked the minister who was sitting in the front seat, that, sir, why did you cut that out? Then he first laughed, then he said, Mr. Mauskar, you have been in government for so many years. These are realities of life. So I said, sir, what is the reality of life? Ye kaise kar diya aapne? Kehte bhai, I am also in a system. Now, what had happened later on, we found out, there is a very strong, that's the phrase I was searching for, regulatory capture. There is a very strong body of automobile manufacturers. And they went somewhere, pressed the right buttons, and that thing was deleted. And it's not there anymore. It's still not there. I was talking to the CPCB colleagues. I said, put it back again. कहते फिर काट देंगे. मैंने कहा काटेंगे तो देखेंगे पहले डालो तो सही. Because now, compared to 10 years ago when I was there, now everything is put on the website. Though in those days there was no website, so people even didn't know. I also didn't know till 1 month after the standards were formally published in the Gazette that benzene soluble thing has vanished. So, sir, the point is, unless you define the standards properly, unless you measure the standards properly, implementation or even framing the scheme for implementation is not going to succeed. Because if you have a larger discussion where the stakeholders are there, the builder lobby will say it is due to transportation sector, it is all organic in nature. The transportation guys will say, no, sir, it is wrong. It is silicaceous thing, but it is not coming from Thar Desert. It is coming from these builders. They are making so many buildings and all that dust is floating around. Somebody did mention that roadside dust is there. Now, there are ways of doing it, source apportionment. So, we have to be clear that unless our base is solid, unless our standards are proper, unless our measurement methods are proper, the solutions will not work. Now, you say that, well, what about the solutions? Solutions are, we are not reinventing the wheel. There was a phrase I read somewhere, reinventing the wheel. Countries have gone through that path. I mean, I'm not talking of US or Europe. China has gone through the path. Of course, their governing system is different. Their people are different. They talk different language, look differently. But it's the same path. Only thing is, what we have to do is what they say, indigenize. Now, indigenization is 5% of the effort. 95% has already been done. We don't have to think about all these things. And this, you're talking about stopping the import of Euro 6. Now, if you talk to the car manufacturers lobby, they say these cars cannot use that fantastic fuel. So then I asked them the same question. I said, you're importing, I asked the Maruti people, you're importing those Maruti cars to Czechoslovakia or somewhere. Why don't you sell them in India? कहते साहब यहाँ खपेगा नहीं हमें क्यों नहीं खपेगा बोले competition वाले सस्ता बेच देंगे our goods will not sell. So these kind of business arguments are there, and government cannot come and settle these business arguments, because then it becomes who is the stronger. No, that is where consumer movements come. Ralph Nader single-handedly changed the whole automobile industry. Now, where is Ralph Nader of India? Maybe somewhere, sitting somewhere. Now, I wanted to say something about this climate change finance, because that was a long discussion. I somehow felt that it was like it was a bit of a confused discussion, not for the participants, panelists, but for those who must have been hearing. A new phrase has come up. A gentleman who has left the service of Government of India today, I think, is flying. He coined a phrase, carbon imperialism. Now, we had this imperialism of East India Company about which you have written. But this carbon imperialism is a new imperialism which is coming, that under the guise of climate change, which is an inexorable phenomena and all that we know, I've been dealing with it, they say that now you must do not what we are going to do or what we did, you must do what we tell you to do. And when we talk of climate finance, I also coined 3 words: scope, scale, and speed. Scope, what is your climate finance covering? Only renewables. But renewables are not our biggest problem. They may be for this air pollution. Our biggest problem is that once the unanticipated, there was a dust storm in whole of Uttar Pradesh this year, if you remember, for 2-3 days, there was tremendous dust storm. Now, that is not, there is no history in IMD of these kind of dust storms taking place. There are some cycles. Or the rainfall. The city of Bombay got 1 week's rainfall in 2 hours. Adaptation is the priority. So the scope is limited only to renewables, nothing else, not efficiency. Somebody talked that in US, 30% of the additional energy from windmills came from upgradation of old windmills. Now, why can't we upgrade Bhakra Dam turbine? Why can't we upgrade all those NTPC old turbines? And those are simple solutions. You'll get all this financing, this, that, risk, and all these things will be covered. But we are not talking of that. That's not covered under climate financing. So that's the scope. What is the scale? Somebody mentioned, Rajeshri mentioned, IFC, it's not Ministry of Finance, it is saying it. It is not some domestic this thing who's saying it. IFC is saying $3.1 trillion from now till 2030 is the requirement for adaptation and mitigation for India. $3.1 trillion divided by 12, how much? $200 billion. And what are we talking of? We are talking of 100 million here and 50 million there. And all these financial guys are perking up their collars that $100 million we brought. But your IFC is saying $200 billion a year. Where is the scale? And then what is the speed? Now, since all these investments, so many people repeated that India is at a very crux of it. 80% of infrastructure is still to be made. All those smart cities are still to be constructed. This is the time to be energy efficient. This is the time to be this, and this is the time to be that. And if the money is backloaded, if they say that we'll give you out of the $3.1 trillion, we'll give you $1 trillion in the year 2030. What good is it to me? It is of no good to me. So climate change, and sir, I'll come to it, why it is relevant to us, because the action which will be taken to tackle climate change, whether for adaptation or for mitigation, the action we'll take for adaptation will reduce our poverty. And besides the votes, the poverty eradication is something which will make India a happier place, which will make India a healthier place. Because right now when people are sick, they just swallow a kerosene and go to work. If he was not that poor, he'll take 2 days holidays. So the overlap which is there between removal of air pollution and our climate change actions, that is negawatts as they're called, energy efficiency measures which will reduce for each unit of energy the carbon dioxide emitted, will also reduce your air pollution. Okay, so because of this overlap, somehow if we can bring these measures under, knowing fully well that they are for air quality improvement, but we call them, and not wrongly, because that's the co-benefit of it, for climate change measure, and then we get the climate change finance. So the same thing takes place, but like, public transport. When clean development mechanism was there in the Kyoto Protocol, the carbon credits were available to Delhi Metro, or Indian Railways, for synchronizing their signal system, because of which they said they will save 5% of the diesel which they are burning per year. 5% diesel, you say, what is it? But it's quite a lot. If you see when it adds to the thing. And they were getting carbon credits, then the carbon credits disappeared. That's a long story, we'll not go into it. But if carbon finance comes for these kind of energy efficiency measures, and the traffic becomes efficient, you produce power with less burning of coal, it will all help the breathing, it will help the air pollution. This SDG, number of people were saying SDGs versus climate change. I only want to leave you with one thought, although climate change also is one of the SDGs. SDGs were given to ourselves. The countries met and they said by 2030, why not 2028, why not 2032? So 2030 is a round thing from 2015 to 2030. We will do this, this and that. They could have said, if they don't do it by 2030, they do by 2040, heavens are not going to fall. But climate change, if you hear about 1.5 degree goal, you hear about 2 degree goal, there are climate models, there are variations. But the fact is that it is an externality. All the carbon dioxide which is there in the air right from the industrial revolution is oppressing us. It is creating heat for us. And even if you stop all burning of fossil fuels, if you have clean air in Delhi, like when there are Bandh in Delhi, when there is a Bandh in Delhi, or 26th January or 15th August, air is perceptibly cleaner. It's not going to take away the climate change impacts. They are there, they are coming. So I think, sir, what I'll suggest is that the same steps we can put in a different garb. Somebody was saying, "Tum suit pehen ke kyun aaye? Ab to dress badli ho gaya." Wo jacket, not kurta. Kurta is on your side of the fence. On my side of the fence, it is shirt and that jacket. So maybe the actions which have been deliberated upon can be put under climate change garb. Now, I'll just quickly go through. Madam, this climate change is not causing the health problems which people, eczema and all, which people are getting. Eczema is due to the dirty water, the municipal failure. On these 3 tiers of governance, state, central, and this thing, I was reminded of a story, sir. Pandit Nehru never lost an election except at municipal level. Twice he lost. When he contested the Allahabad municipality, that time there was no municipal corporation, it was Allahabad municipality. One to a Dhobi and once, I think, to a Pahalwan. M.J. Akbar ke kitab mein tha. So, the lower you go in political level, more difficult it is to function, more difficult it is to get the results. In developed countries, it is otherwise. The municipal governances in London, boroughs and all that, they function autonomously. They're not bothered about who is the prime minister. They have their rights and they do it and they'll be done with it. Here, it's not like that. And the pollution control boards, the Central Pollution Control Board, I have got only one mantra for it, and that is transparency. And it has been implemented, but somehow there is a gap between the implementation and the people knowing about it. All the large companies, all the large polluters have been asked to put continuous air quality monitoring, and that result has to be put on their website and displayed on the large boards. Like, this, if you enter this hotel, they say outside SPM level so much, inside the hotel is so much. So all the factories are supposed to do it. If they don't do, they're liable to be punished. I think that an involvement of the stakeholders is a much bigger solution or a better solution than saying that SPCBs will have 20 more inspectors, or the budgets of SPCBs will be increased by 100 crores. Because I don't know what is the ratio, teeth to tail ratio, or the budget to utilization ratio, depends on states to states, but it is never 100%. So more money you dump at them, more it will leak out. So perhaps if in some ways the people are made aware and they look at the, I mean, if you are near a power plant and you see that black smoke coming out, you didn't earlier know what to do. But now you go to the website, find out what he's reporting and tell that to SPCB. In the court of law, it will stand. Now, last is, I'll come to you. The punishments, the criminal punishments under the Air Pollution Control, Water Pollution Control, and Environment Control Act are adequate. I mean, but nobody, even in Bhopal, nobody has been sent to jail. The financial punishments, in those days, in 1970 and all, 10,000 rupees was a big amount. I mean, I started with the salary of 700 rupees. So 10,000 rupees was a big amount. Now 10,000 rupees, I think people spend for a single, one per head lunch or dinner here. Those amounts have to be revised. But I'm told that in the, I mean, Mr. Anand Sharma, I wanted to tell him that in the committee somewhere, this proposal dies, I mean, it doesn't die actually, it just goes unconscious. So those things can be done. And so Greenpeace, I mean, you people are innovative, you go to all drilling rigs in Russia and all those kind of things. Now, the point is that throwing more money at SPCB, CPCB and all, I don't think is going to happen. It is not going to happen, number one, because of the Finance Commission awards. Now, state governments are getting lots of chunk of money. Central government says, तुमको पैसा दे दिया, उसको ठीक से खर्च करो. If I am chief minister or anybody, if I am in politics, what I will be focused at, I don't have to elaborate that. Election cycle, sir, you were saying yesterday, are becoming smaller and smaller. When I was young, they said 4.5 साल काम करेंगे, 6 महीना तो election है. Now I think 6 महीना काम करेंगे, 4.5 साल election है. It has become like the US. So basically, I think if we can just hit on this transparency thing, and there are written instructions, closure orders have been issued, and all these things. Sterlite, big, huge firing and all those things. Sterlite was supposed to put its pollution levels up there on the website. I don't know, I didn't check whether they did or not. And if they did, and if they were wrong, then it is the people who are agitating who are wrong. Why didn't they complain? Sterlite should have been closed much earlier. Or did they go to the court with all those facts and figures rather than saying these are bad people, they are polluting or these kind of things? Data-based. So I think so I've spoken enough. But to sum it up, one more point I missed. Sir, whatever you do has to be fair. I wanted to say equitable, but equity then confuses people, so I thought fairness, although it's a social norm. All this e-vehicle thing, it's good, you know. E-vehicles you have all over India, I mean all over Delhi. It is nice. But what you're doing is you're exporting the pollution to coal-burning plants somewhere in Jumri Talaiya or some such thing. So what you're doing is you are exporting your pollution to some area which was pristine. Now, hard choices have to be made, naturally, if you want to become superpower. So naturally, pollution burden has to be shared equally. But it should not happen like it is happening in Bathinda. Bathinda, they say, has become the cancer capital of India. There are trains, they call it cancer trains. So Delhi becomes pristine and all the vehicles in Delhi, buses, cars, Mercedes-Benz, Daimlers, they are all e-vehicles. And then the power is supplied to it by some NTPC or some Jindal or something power plant somewhere 500 kilometers away. And those guys are in trouble. Now, that is where the equity comes. So maybe the speed of the change should be perhaps linked with the speed of your renewable energy or clean energy generation. Plus, as I said, why can't we say that those power plants which was set up 20 years ago, either they close or they replace their turbines, replace their electrostatic precipitators, and become as clean as possible. But otherwise, the way the discussion was going and your first phase and all, you're cleaning up, okay, you're cleaning up Delhi, you're cleaning up Gwalior, you're cleaning up Kanpur. And then Kanpur Dehat will be dirtier. Gwalior Dehat will be dirtier. So what's the fun? It's not equitable. That was my last point. I mean, we used to beat our breast about equity in climate change negotiations. But I think if India wants equity internationally, India must be equitable domestically also. So I hope somebody has noted that point.
Indeed, that's been very instructive. I had promised you a second round, but given that we're hoping to finish at 5 and it's 10:02, unless somebody has a burning point they want to make, I'll try and... Yes, sir.
So I had a question about politics. We talk so much about the environment, we talk so much about a fair deal. But my question to you, sir, as a member of parliament, is how do you build a consensus on this issue of importance that is both politically viable and policy effective?
That's a tough one. Well, yes. Is it linked? Go ahead. Okay.
So last year, 56,000 crore. My name is Jaspreet. I'm a student of environmental policy from the London School of Economics. 56,000 crore, which was collected as coal cess, was transferred from the National Clean Energy and Environment Fund to the GST regime. You know, when you talk about consensus, so actions such as these make us question our priorities. You know, we have funding that was supposed to be used in a certain space, which requires critical action, but then it was used elsewhere, which was at that point seemed to be more important. So consensus again.
That's a very, very important concern. I was going to mention the coal cess, because that is a substantial sum of money, and it had actually been mentioned in the context of trying to compensate farmers to prevent them from stubble burning, crop stubble burning. But now that money, as you say, has gone to the GST compensation fund to pay states for the loss of revenue as a result of switching to GST. And as a result, this environmental bonus is no longer available, though of course it'll keep coming in. The cess continues and new amounts will come in. And we certainly hope they won't keep going to the GST. But there is a general challenge, and indeed my own theme, since I spoke on the first day about the problem, I thought in wrapping up I would try and focus a bit on the solutions. I think we've all listened to Mr. Mauskar with a great deal of interest. There are some practical issues that obviously have to be addressed, and it's at various levels. There is a need for a national clean air policy. We are all awaiting Niti Aayog's report, which is due imminently, and we'll see what they've come up with. Individuals have come up with ideas and recommendations as well. I think ORF is working on some too, if I'm right. Is that right, Abhijit? And collectively, we should have some specifics. The important thing is to go right back to that key argument that was made from the start of the day, that laws, policies, even action plans and targets are not enough if we don't implement them properly. And so the great importance lies in ensuring actionable implementation steps. Now, there's some very specific things that can and should be done. If it is true, as one statistic mentioned today has it, that 46% of India's pollution comes from across the border, then there's not much we can do about that. Is that a figure that somebody took that note? No? That's too high? Well, that is what I was told was said by one of the speakers today. Yeah, it is in one of the reports.
46% on that particular occasion or constantly?
It is an annual figure came in, actually the HEI report. Which report? HEI,
Health efficiency report. So it seems high, but I think partly it's explained by what comes to us from the West. There is no doubt that there are enormous amounts of dust storms and dust particles coming from the Arab world. There is also crop stubble burning and similar industrial pollution coming from Pakistan. The winds blow this way. So it's not impossible that some of it's 246 seem to me very high, but obviously if it is that, then there is certainly a case for some international cooperation in this regard. But I think we need to get our own act together first before we turn around to other countries. But that's something we need to bear in mind, that we really are looking for solutions to apparently 54% of our problem. Now, in terms of practical steps, one of the things that many of you seem to focus on today is vehicular pollution. I was a bit surprised about that because at the time of the famous odd-even experiment in Delhi, there were a lot of articles that said that vehicular pollution is a very minor contributor to pollution in Delhi. And in fact, Yogesh, do you have the figure that the experts were saying was the percentage that... 24% of the IIT Delhi study, yeah. But IIT Kanpur study, I beg your pardon. But I'm told that much of the discussion today did focus on vehicular pollution. So even if it's only less than a quarter of the pollution we get, those are certainly things that can be tackled if there's a political will. We've talked about emission standards in fuel, getting the Euro 6 standards, making them compulsory in India, seeing if we can divert our currently exported fuel into Indian vehicles, and ensuring all Indian vehicles sold after a particular date have to be in conformity with those standards, and that vehicles sold before that will expire at a particular point, that they will no longer given roadworthiness certificates if they cannot use modern fuels. So that's one possible thing. Urban areas could certainly create vehicle-free zones for cyclists and pedestrians only. That could be one possible way as well. We don't have any systematic policy anywhere in the country for subsidizing public transport on the grounds of environmentalism. In fact, particularly on peak pollution days, if we were, for example, to cut down on vehicle use, not by this arbitrary odd-even thing, because, you know, if you have an emergency or an unavoidable commitment, or you're living in an area where you can't carpool or whatever, and you have a car with the wrong license plate, you unnecessarily suffer. I think what we can do, though I must admit that though I thought that would be an argument that could be used in court, the courts did not support it. The court supported the odd-even scheme. But nonetheless, rather than that, one measure could be, for example, that if pollution crosses a certain level, the government will automatically punish itself by subsidizing 50% of, say, metro fares and bus fares. And that to only buses on CNG, not buses operating on diesel. That could be one possible idea. We've got to tackle the entire issue of waste disposal. Incineration is still too popular in our waste disposal practices in our country. That has to go, because if you can move away from burning into composting and other sorts of things, you will actually make much more progress. There are tax incentives that can be given for everything from battery-operated items. I don't just mean cars. We could subsidize the price of air purifiers or slash GST on them. I think right now an air purifier attracts 28% GST. It ought to be down to 3 or something. Gold is 3%. Maybe air purifiers should be seen like gold. I mean, it's really important. We could mandate much more green cover for new buildings, terrace gardens, require every new construction to have a green on the roof as well as around it. And we have a government that has spent 4,344 crores in the last 4 years on various kinds of publicity for itself. It seems to me that publicity, advertising, and messaging for a fraction of that money could actually change behavior patterns. Singapore is a very good example of that, though obviously being a very small island country with a controlled population, you can argue that it's not a relevant model for India. But just literally, if every day you're hearing a jingle on the radio, seeing a public service ad on TV, seeing a hoarding on the street, exhorting you to save water or smile at people or be courteous, or if you're a female graduate, then to marry a male graduate, all of these things Singapore has done. And every one of them has worked. In every single impact of this kind of consistent, sustained, intensive advertising, literally you pick up the phone and say, dial tone you're hearing, let's not waste precious water as a jingle. And then immediately everyone says, oh my gosh, did I shut the tap in between while brushing my teeth or while shaving or whatever, and water gets saved. Now, I'm not being entirely facetious. In fact, I'm not being facetious at all. I'm being quite serious. Indians will remember some of the very, very few major public service announcement campaigns in our country. My generation, and I'm a little older, I think, than Mr. Mauskar, but the Nirod campaign, Hum Do Hamare Do, was extremely, I mean, everybody was talking about all over the country, because you couldn't go even into the remotest village without seeing a blessed hoarding telling you to control population. And that campaign ended, but while it was there, it made people extraordinarily conscious of the need for contraception. Similarly, one can easily imagine a situation in which a major sustained advertising campaign on environmental issues with specific target objectives could change people's behavior. And I must say, I think we should do that. We also need to go beyond that. On the first day, yesterday evening, there was a gentleman here who I sadly don't see in the audience anymore, who told me that his entire building, every floor, every office, every corridor, has oxygen-producing plants, and as a result, his office building is completely clean air without any mechanical or electronic device. It's entirely through plants. We can encourage every household to get oxygen-generating plants. The money plant, I think, is often mentioned as an example, and there's one called the mother-in-law's tongue, which I don't know who named it, but there's a plant that also generates oxygen. Were you going to say something on that?
Yeah, the oxygen producing plants are quite expensive.
Expensive.
Because I've thought about buying them myself. So if that price
So let's give an incentive to people to grow them.
perhaps, yeah, that is a good idea.
Yeah. And then, of course, the alternative energy ideas that Mr. Mauskar has already put in perspective, whether it's solar, whether it's anything else. But these are ideas. The thing is, how do we get them done? And that brings me back to the question that was asked at the end by Alim, how do we get the political consensus? Now, one of the concerns I have is the way in which our country works, and I'm going to be a bit cynical here, is that actually political consensus is almost irrelevant. How do laws get written? How do the regulations I've been recommending get passed? Bureaucrats write them. Their minister buys into them. They're presented to a parliament in which the government already has a majority, and it gets passed. The opposition may object, may come up with better ideas, may suggest constructive amendments. At least in the experience of the present government, in the entire 4.5 years of this government and the Lok Sabha, not one amendment, even the most common sense suggestion, has been accepted by the government. Not one, for any bill. So once the bill is written, political consensus is irrelevant because the government believes it can railroad its bill through. I'm waiting to hear what happened today to the trafficking bill in which I spoke because I couldn't stay for the conclusion. After I went through a fairly detailed anatomization of what was wrong with the bill, I urged the minister to get a rethink by offering it to a standing committee to look at. And I gather that every single opposition speaker has endorsed my demand. So inasmuch as there is a consensus in the parliament, it is in favor of looking into my objections in greater detail in a committee with other parties in it. I can tell you sort of privately that a couple of BJP MPs told me they agree with every single word I said. But they added, we'll have to go back and vote if the party wants us to vote because there's a whip and we'll have to vote against your bill. Now, I don't know what the outcome was, but I'd be very surprised if the outcome wasn't that this very deeply flawed bill got passed, because that's the way our system works. So, Alam, the answer is we do not need a political consensus. We need to persuade a government. And that's why I'm rather disappointed that Dr. Harshvardhan, who had promised to come to this meeting, and we had told him you can come at any time, either yesterday or today, has been unable to join us. I think it's a pity. But we certainly hope that with the credentials we have here, the stakeholders who made their suggestions, Dr. Mauskar himself was a former special secretary of the Ministry of the Environment, that we can actually submit a decent set of recommendations out of this meeting that we can then give both to the minister and to his secretary, as well as to Niti Aayog, since they've now taken an interest in this issue, so that before we meet again in a third edition of the same forum next year, that we can actually be in a better place than we are today. I think that's pretty much all I have to contribute this evening. I'd like to thank once again Air Quality Asia and the ORF for having co-sponsored this event. Last year, as I said, I did it on my own, and I think that I've had very, very much better participation, constructive inputs, and a higher scale of involvement, thanks to the involvement of these organizations. I also want to thank the staff, the team who've done all the work. Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to thank the team that's done so much good work. John Koshi, Vijaydhar, all the young people, Aparajit, I don't know the names of all the volunteers, researchers of ORF, and indeed of my own staff and interns, Ashwin, Ravin, and others, Asta, who have done so much to make this a successful event. I hope that you will make sure that we know how to reach you. So when we come up with our conclusions that we're going to send to the ministry, we share them with you. John, do you have a participant's email address for everyone who's come? Excellent. So we'll let you all know how we summarize the conclusions and we'll let you have a copy of the letter we sent to the Ministry and to Niti Aayog. And with those words, once again, thanks to all of you. Let's hope that we will be able to celebrate the right to breathe before we see each other again. Thank you very much.